Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 10 of For Those About to Pod, We Salute You. On this week's show, Matt and I will be discussing the year in rock that was 1979. We'll also be going through some of the greatest bands where we had not one lead guitarist, but two lead guitarists, maybe three. We'll also cover our usual features of the news and some hidden gems. But before we go any further, let me introduce to you my partner in podcasting crime, Mr. Matt Rogers. Hey, Matt, how are you?
Hello, Brian.
Hey,
nice
Matt.
To see you again.
Yeah, and you?
Do you remember a couple of episodes ago, we were talking about Bryfest? Well, one of our South African listeners contacted me and she said, I was listening to your podcast and I thought you were talking about Bryfest, which apparently is a South African festival where people braai, which, as you probably know, is not sure that's 100% true or not. I'm going with it. Where you know, South African people refer to having a barbecue as having a braai. Anyway, so I've been in touch with my lawyers, and they said that you are in what is known as copyright infringement.
Am I?
And therefore, I am the winner of the best festival ever with Matt Stock. So I just thought I'd mention that to you. That's literally hot off the press. That is literally hot off the press. So there you go, Brian. What is your reaction to that? Because you did make, to be fair, you did make it into a competition, did you? So you deserve what you get.
I'm so pleased that you took the honourable way out of accepting defeat by involving lawyers to overturn the decision. I'll maybe come up with a different name for that. Maybe we'll call it Brian's Bryfest.
Okay.
I'll get my lawyers on it as well too. I'm sure Matt Stock is. I'll find a name for Matt Stock somewhere. But thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome. However, my lawyers did also say that you are allowed to talk about Thin Lizzy now, so that's good news.
Excellent. And gosh, won't we need them in this episode?
Exactly. I thought you'd be pleased. So, what has caught your eye lately, Brian? I feel like I always say that. So, what's in the news, Brian? What's in the news?
So, in the news this week, Matt, and it is International Women's Day yesterday on Monday the 8th of March.
Correct.
One of the greatest ladies in rock, Nancy Wilson, released the lead-off track from her new album, which is coming out later this year. So, Nancy, we all know Nancy is predominantly the guitar player in Heart. Which great band, still going well, and she's a rock and roll Hall of Fame inductee. So her solo album is coming out in May this year. It's called You and Me, and it's Nancy's got some big hitting friends that are going to be in the album. Matt Sorum and Duff McKagan from latterly of Guns N' Roses. And there's a nice little touch for Eddie Van Halen in there as well too. So Eddie
nice.
For Eddie, there's a little tune. It's quite an acoustic album, but as you and I have discussed before, with Nancy, with doing the a lot of the Seattle type music in the '90s, where she was playing lots of Led Zeppelin covers, etc. It's quite an acoustic album, lots of original material. But she actually sings a version of The Boxer with the old Simon & Garfunkel tune with Sammy Hagar. So looking forward to that. Nice to hear Nancy as a lead singer and a guitar player. So that lead track was released yesterday, which is called You and Me, and the album You and Me is out in May. So that was the first thing that caught my eye. Gary Moore posthumously has got a new album which is coming out to coincide with 10 years since Gary's passed away. I've heard a few of the tracks off. It's mainly unreleased material, but there's a ballad which has just been released called In My Dreams. Very much, if you're a fan of Still Got the Blues and Parisian Walkways, it's in that similar vein. So it'd be nice to hear some material from Gary. 10 years after he's passed. And then the final little bit of news for me was Danny Boyle. So Danny Boyle has been working away on a series around the Sex Pistols, telling the great rock and roll swindle once again. It's in production at the moment, and it's very much based around Steve Jones's book called Lonely Boy: Tales from a Sex Pistol. So in production, and if it's Oscar-winning Danny Boyle on board, I'm expecting it to be very good. So that's the news from me, Matt.
That's good. We talked a long time ago, maybe like episode 1 or 2 or something, months ago, about rockumentaries, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
And, or not rockumentary, this is not a rockumentary, obviously. This is a, kind of biopic.
Yes.
Or a bio-series, possibly. And I wonder, I mean, as we said at the time, where will it all end? Will they have a biopic about us at some point? I wonder. With
So who would play you then?
well, that's a good question, Brian. Very good question. So my wife would say, sadly he's passed away now, but if he hadn't have passed away, my wife would have said Alan Rickman, of course.
Not who I would have picked for you.
Who would you have picked to play me in the story, the Hollywood blockbuster that would be our podcast, Brian?
I would go with Gary Oldman.
Would you?
Okay. Yeah.
I'm quite flattered about that.
I'd go with Gary Oldman.
Okay.
Me?
I would go with, for you...
Here we go, people.
I would go with Adrian Dunbar. Adrian Dunbar, for those who don't know, is a fantastic Northern Irish actor. I think would be between him and Liam Neeson.
I like Liam Neeson.
You like the sound of Liam Neeson, don't you?
Yes. We could do a version of Podcast Taken.
You could.
I will find you. And when
I will find you. And when I do, I'll make you listen to my podcast.
Exactly.
So, a couple of things. So, you and I have talked about the new group, the new mini supergroup, or supergroup, as you might call them.
Supergroup.
Of Smith Kotzen. Adrian Smith and Richie Kotzen, of course. We talked about them a lot. And again, I would urge people to check out a song by them called Scars.
Uh-huh.
Now, a couple of things about this song. A, it's a fantastic song. B, where has Adrian Smith been hiding his singing voice all these years? Because he has got an absolutely fantastic singing voice. And you can tell the difference between him and Richie Kotzen singing. They kind of flip-flop the singing. But Adrian Smith, fantastic singing voice. So, check out Scars, everyone, by Smith Kotzen. I'm sure that will be on our Spotify playlist, Brian, won't it? Number 1,
it certainly will. It will be in chronology.
Number 2.
Okay.
The other thing which I'm quite excited about, because I quite like this guy as both a guitarist and I don't know whether you call him a co-lead singer in Alice in Chains, but Jerry Cantrell has got just recently this week, announced a new solo album coming out. Now, I quite like Jerry Cantrell. Again, great guitarist, nice guy. I never met him, of course. I'd like to. Seems like a nice fella.
Yeah.
And you're going to tell me you've met him now, haven't you? Probably. I didn't hear it. I didn't listen to his first solo album, but I think you did, and you were quite impressed, weren't you?
I was very impressed. The album it was one of those after Alice in Chains kind of went into hiatus because of the way in which Lane Staley was. And he went into the studio and he came out with the album. And I remember just buying it without hearing a single track on it. And the singing as a lead vocalist. I agree with you. Jerry Cantrell is the co-lead singer in Alice in Chains, but the material was great. He actually toured it as well too with a couple people like Chris DeGarmo out of Queensryche. Would you believe it? And it's very rootsy, very just good rock. So I bought that album. It's one of those albums I just bought and thought, I'll just try this. And it's a really, really, really good album. And an album, if we weren't talking about it, it'd be one that you would consider putting in Hidden Gems.
Yeah. I was just about to say, you wasted that one, haven't you?
I have wasted that one.
You wasted that. You can't have that one now.
But no, very, very good. Very good. Good pedigree.
Yeah, indeed. And then finally, on a sad note, now, a few weeks ago, we were talking about Spinal Tap. In fact, we probably talk about This Is Spinal Tap, the movie, quite a lot.
Yes.
And I've got a couple of things to talk about This Is Spinal Tap. Sadly, the actor Tony Hendra passed away this week. Now, for those who know the film will know the band's manager, Ian Faith, the typically English manager of Spinal Tap, who used to carry a cricket bat around with him for whatever reason. Anyway, sadly, Tony Hendra passed away this week, and that was quite sad. But I was wondering, in the spirit of setting up a competition for our now 12 listeners, or is it 13? Anyway, it's around that mark.
It
12,
is.
13 listeners. I've got a competition, but with no prize because we don't have a budget, of course. And could anyone tell us, through the magic of Facebook, what actor links This Is Spinal Tap and Wayne's World? Now, you might have to Google it, which would be cheating, of course.
That would be cheating.
But, of course, there's no prize, so it doesn't really matter. But because we haven't got a budget. But which actor links... Do you know? You probably know this because you're a clever so-and-so. Or you could hazard a guess. But have a think about it, boys and girls.
Have they both been? Have they actually been in the movie?
Well, yeah, that's the whole idea. So they're both in the movie.
Okay.
So, which actor links This Is Spinal Tap and Wayne's World?
I can't think of it. I can't think of it off the top of my head. If I'm being honest, no. That's a bit of a doozy, that one.
That's a teaser, isn't it? It's up there with the best, unless you know both films, of course. Then it's quite straightforward.
It's always easy if you know the answer. That's
true. If you go on Pointless, of course, which is a British TV show, and there's one day there might be actors that were in This Is Spinal Tap, and this would be a pointless answer. Right. I would guarantee it.
Okay.
Anyway, shall we move on, Brian?
We shall indeed.
Enough of the news. Have we done all the news? I think we have. It's been an interesting week. And anyway, so last time we
did the fantastic year of Y2K, which was a phenomenal year in rock.
Well, I would agree if that was the case.
Exactly.
No, it was an odd year, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't great, but it was okay. However,
yes.
By contrast, you set me 1979.
Yes, it was. I do remember.
Now, normally at this stage, you asked me how old I was in 1979, but I'm wondering, after thinking about it and having told everyone that my birthday is the 23rd of April, countless times.
Yes.
And roughly giving away my age. I turned 14 in 1979, by the way. I wonder whether I'm giving away too much PII, personally identifiable information. And I'll tell you why. Because I got a call the other day from someone asking me whether I'd been in an accident that wasn't my fault. And I thought, he must have got my details from the podcast, maybe. But anyway, so 1979, I turned 14. How old were you in 1979, Brian?
I was 10 years old for most of the year.
Oh, bless. Oh, because your birthday's coming up, isn't it?
It is.
I won't give away your birthday, otherwise you might get calls about accidents you weren't.
Does that mean we can't? Does that mean that we can't list and name anybody? Can you imagine if we did have competitions, Matt, and we had to name people who won our competitions? Then they would be personally identifiable.
And name's all right.
Okay.
Name's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you can say someone's name.
Okay, that's all right.
It's just all the other stuff, date of birth, passport number, and so on. That's difficult territory. So, because I was going to talk about your passport number.
Well, yeah, so
I decided not to. Anyway, 1979.
Nothing much
Yes,
happened, did it? Really?
Well, not really. No, it's a very quiet year. Actually, so interesting year for me. So it's probably the first year that I discovered rock, if I'm honest. So I probably told you this before. I was 14, 13, 14 that year. And I didn't have any older siblings or anything like that, which is often the source of, not for us, because we don't have older siblings. We're the oldest in our family, aren't we? You and
We
I.
are, yeah.
But in our respective families. But in a lot of cases, people have their older siblings and, whatnot. But I didn't. So anyway, but I went to, what I did do, I went to a kind of a rock school. It wasn't a school where they taught you about rock. It happened to be a school, regular school, normal school. But there were a lot of people there that liked rock music. Thin Lizzy were big there, Kiss. Oh, I mentioned Thin Lizzy. Anyway, we'll come back to them later. Rush.
Uh-huh.
So I had a little sort of, I thought, I was looking for something to kind of, hang on to get involved with. I was a big fan of the Boomtown Rats. I used to love Bob Geldof. I wanted to be Bob Geldof when I was 13 or 14. In fact, I watched a really good, I probably should keep this for the Hidden Gem at some point, but I watched an excellent Boomtown Rats documentary recently, which I would recommend to everyone, but by the by. So anyway, so I discovered rock in 1979, and I can remember buying various albums of that year. Would you like me to tell you about them?
That would be very nice, and if you could do it from your
Point of view of the listener.
No. No, if you
Point
can
of view
do
of the
it
record.
exactly. No, if you can do it as you always do, with your lowest ranking to your highest ranking, and keep us all in suspense of what your greatest album was in 1979.
Okay, I will do that then.
Okay.
I wasn't going to do that, but I'll do that.
Oh, well, you do it whatever way you want. Then it's our show.
I'll go. That is true, actually. I'll go in kind of reverse order. So I'm only going to talk about 4 albums because 2 of my favourite live albums were released that year, and we've talked a lot about Unleashed in the East by Judas Priest, and also Strangers in the Night by UFO. So I'm only going to talk about 4 because there are loads and loads and loads and loads of albums that were released that year, and loads of stuff going on, of course.
Yes.
Now, number 4 was the last Led Zepp album, In Through the Outdoor. Now, I didn't know it was the last album at the time. Of course, sadly, a year or so later, 1980, John Bonham died. But In Through the Outdoor, probably not my favourite Led Zepp album. Some interesting stuff on it. If you listen to something like Carousel Alhambra, which is a very kind of keyboard-heavy song, and compare that with A Whole Lot of Love. Okay, it was 10 years or so apart, but, a huge difference. And I've often pondered, in fact, I was pondering the other night about what would Led Zepp be like now if they'd have continued? It's an interesting one because would they still be going or not? Kind of a la Pink Floyd, let's say.
Yeah.
Or would they have been like Deep Purple, where they just kind of keep, plugging away, doing similar sort of stuff? But anyway, it's a moot point, really, in a way, because it wasn't to be. In Through the Outdoor, good album, 1979. Number 4, Love Drive by the Scorpions, which it's got a very risque cover. And you and I talked about this, and you're going to tell me your little story about that. But not as risque as some other Scorpions covers, I might add. But, it's another story for another day. Love Drive, got some great songs on it. Michael Schenker plays on it. And in his kind of post-UFO, pre-Michael Schenker group little era.
Yeah.
And again, some great songs on that. Obviously, the title itself, Loving You Sunday Morning, Always Somewhere. I'm reading these off. I don't know whether they're on there or not. Yeah, some good stuff on there, and a good album worth investing in, and a kind of a turning point for Scorpions, I think. Uli Roth had left, and they left that kind of sort of space rocky feel of the 70s behind, and embraced the 80s with a more sort of hard edged rock sound. Matthias Jabs joined in 1979 to replace Michael Schenker. And, they kind of never looked back, really. So I would recommend Love Drive by the Scorpions for those that like a bit of Germanic rock.
My introduction to Love Drive was the song, which was on the greatest ever compilation album, which is Headstone Best of UFO, because it's got all the UFO tracks, and then it's got all of the who was connected with UFO. So Love Drive, the track, was on that album, and that's what introduced me to the Scorpions. And then it was those times when we used to hang about the record stores. As young as I was, going into record stores, and you were seeing the covers of the Scorpions albums, you're going, "Oh, I wouldn't be allowed to buy that one." So you knew the album without really hearing it, because you weren't really allowed to buy it. That was the good thing about whenever CDs came out, you didn't have to hawk around a big massive LP. You could buy a CD and you could get away with it and bring it into your car, and Mummy and Daddy wouldn't see it.
Well, that's true. Actually, you sort of stick it in your trousers, kind of thing, couldn't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Almost the greatest hits. You look back at the album, as I say, "Loving You Sunday Morning," "Another Piece of Meat." The excellent instrumental "Coast to Coast" is on there.
Yeah.
"Holiday," "Is There Anybody There?" and so on. Great album, and I should have made it number one. Actually, so good. Maybe I should rethink this order. So that was number 3. Number 2. Of course, and we talked a lot about AC/DC over the weeks, and in 1979 they released "Highway to Hell," which was sadly the last studio album to feature Bon Scott, and but I think the first album to be produced by the mercurial Mutt Lange, and again just an amazing album, a very different feel to the previous AC/DC albums.
Yeah.
And a lot more sort of prominent backing vocals, I seem to recall. I remember noticing that at the time, because the albums up till then had kind of shouty backing vocals feel to it.
Yeah. TNT and Dirty Deeds Done.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas
the gang vocals.
Exactly. I knew you'd know.
Yeah, gang vocals.
Whereas Highway to Hell had a lot more of a kind of a better finish and a better production to the vocals. The guitars were in tune as well, which was good. Not always the case in some of the AC/DC albums for some reason. Is it Power Age or one of the earlier albums where the guitars seem well out of tune? But anyway, by the by, we'll probably edit that bit out. And again, some great songs on it. I mean, amazing songs and a great album. I mean, as I say, as a lasting legacy for Bon Scott. Just some great stuff. And I remember buying it. I bought it on the strength of "Touch Too Much." I remember hearing that, which is probably my favorite song off the album. But I mean, just again, I don't know what it was in the 1970s, but bands released albums that were kind of end to end brilliant. I mean, starts with "Highway to Hell," "Touch Too Much," "Shot Down in Flames" is on there.
Yeah.
"If You Want Blood, You Got It," and just classics. And so, yeah, I mean, brilliant stuff. The classic, as I say, the classic 70s lineup. Yeah. A year or so again before the sad passing of Bon Scott, but again, a great album. So "Highway to Hell," number 2. So, because you were thinking that was going to be number 1, weren't you? But
I was actually. Hey,
you were. I could tell. You thought I got the order wrong, didn't you? But anyway, number 1, I think it was probably the first heavy metal album I bought, probably about October 1979, I think it was released, is "Bomber" by Motorhead. Now, one of our readers one of our listeners, I should say, on Facebook mentioned that 1979 was the year of his starting his obsession with UFO, or whatever the expression was. And for a while, I was obsessed by Motorhead. I wanted to be Lemmy, and I bought the leather jacket, the bullet belt, the Motorhead T-shirt, the iconic T-shirt, and I played Bomber to death. And I look back at it now, and it's a good album still. I mean, I'm not sure it's stood the test of time. The title track, of course, gets a lot of airplay, and I remember the album cover I thought was pretty cool at the time, but I look at it now and it looks a bit odd. With them crammed into a fake bomber, but yeah, great stuff on there. Some good songs. Dead Men Tell No Tales, Stone Dead Forever's on there, all the Aces. I mean, it's just classic Motorhead fodder, really. And in fact, they had 3 albums in that year.
They did, yes.
Strangely enough.
Yeah.
Overkill was earlier in the year. And then later in the year, On Parole was released, which I think was cashing in on their sort of success for those two albums. Yeah. But if you're a Motorhead fan, it was a great time. And they followed that up with Ace of Spades the next year, and then No Sleep Till Hammersmith in 81. But as I say, my introduction to rock and my introduction to Motorhead was Bomber. From 1979.
They're always synonymous with Bronze Records. I always remember when I got when I got the Motorhead albums, and you look at the back of them, you go, Motorhead were signed to Bronze Records.
That's right. Yeah.
And they're just classic covers, etc. So yeah.
Oh yeah.
No. Good choices.
And of course, in those days, it was all on vinyl, so it was all about the album cover, wasn't it? We talked about the Scorpions earlier. Highway to Hell's got a fairly simple album cover.
Yeah.
And Bomber, as I say, has got this strange kind of cartoon bomber with them sort of squeezed into the various pods.
Yeah.
But great album. So, yeah, I mean, probably not everyone's favourite albums of that year, but certainly those that, good memories for me. And certainly Bomber, as I say, was probably, if I could kind of trace my roots back to the album that sort of kick-started my love of rock, it was probably the album Bomber, which was released in October 79.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah,
that's very short and sweet. Other things that happened that year, just while I think of it.
Yeah.
So the Soundhouse tapes, which was a little EP put out by Iron Maiden as their first piece of recorded material, was issued in 1979. And I bought it, mail order. My sister subsequently borrowed it and decided she would write her name on the label, which 40 plus years later has, of course, reduced the value of it quite dramatically from several pounds to 0. So thank you, Lena, for that. Much appreciated. But again, that was another thing. I mean, even an EP, those that listen to our podcast, those of the 12 or so that bought Soundhouse tapes back in the day. And I know for a fact my friend Kelvin Bay has still got his original copy, which is quite something. And it was great. I mean, very raw, very rocky, of course, and, the shape of things to come in a way. So, a lot of good memories of 1979. Learning about rock and buying all the magazines, newspapers, and absorbing it like a sponge, really.
In 1979, I was 10 years old. I wasn't really listening to the rock as in 1979. Having gone through the albums that were released in 1979 and looking at which albums I bought, just a couple of albums I'll just shout out.
Sure.
The Wall by Pink Floyd. Was released in 79.
I've heard of that. Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? By all accounts,
it's not too bad. Kind of the beginning of the end of Pink Floyd, their last great album. Obviously, Roger Waters had pretty much taken over the band, but when you've got an album which has got Comfortably Numb and Another Brick in the Wall on it, and it's probably for some people the greatest concept album beginning to end. So The Wall came out in 79. We've talked about this band. Thin Lizzy released Black Rose, which was the only recording that they ever did with Gary Moore in an album format. To me, it's their greatest, most cohesive piece of work. It's got Black Rose Rushing Dub. It's got some of my favourite, let's just call them deeper tracks, things like Gotta Give It Up, Gotta Give It Up, Get Out of Here, and you've got the singles like Waiting for an Alibi, Sarah, Do Anything. But Tony Visconti produced it, their last great work, and then Gary Moore left, and then we went into the 80s with Thin Lizzy. And the final one for me, somebody who we haven't really talked about on the show, Rory Gallagher. Rory Gallagher released his album Top Priority in 1979. Rory's always known for being pretty much a blues player, very good acoustically, But the band lineup that he had in 1979 was classic three-piece. It was Rory, Jerry McAvoy, and he'd got Ted McKenna in on drums.
Wow.
So they were a hard-rocking three-piece band. Back home, the lead-off track was called Follow Me, and quite a lot of programmes in Ireland used to lead off with that as a theme tune. So Follow Me is quite it's a bit like the How Many Times Do You Hear the Chain by Fleetwood Mac? You know, it's obviously used in the Formula One. So Follow Me was a well-known riff. It's got Philby, Wayward Child, Bad Penny. So if you don't know Rory, and it's somebody you don't listen to, check out Top Priority. It's a really good album. Obviously, Ted McKenna didn't hang around too long in Rory's band, because obviously you and I know that he later in the 80s hooked up with Michael Schenker and joined the Michael Schenker group. So
Correct.
Those are a couple of albums in 1979. But as you said, Matt, we could have included Van Halen 2. We could have talked about Down to Earth with the only album of Graham Bonnet. So 79, as much as 1980s was hailed as a great year of rock, 1979 was no slouch. So
No.
yeah.
No, it was. And it was an interesting year in that it wasn't quite Nwabum time. It was like pre-Nwabum, New Wave of British Heavy Metal, in a way, although that term was coined in 1979.
Okay.
In Sounds magazine, the New Wave of British Heavy Metal, coined by Jeff Barton in I think it was Iron Maiden, Angel Witch and Samson playing at the Music Machine, which is now Coco in Mornington Crescent, Camden area of London, if you know it. It was only coined in that year, so that was the birth of Nwabum, but it really only flourished in 80 and 81. The first Saxon album came out that year, and they'd been going for a few years. And also Def Leppard released their Get Your Rocks Off EP on the brilliant Bludgeon Riffola label.
Brilliant, yeah.
Again, it's still some great stuff on there. A bit like the Maiden Soundhouse tape things. And, very raw and, very different to the very polished Def Leppard that you get these days. And looking back on it, I remember it was the end of punk, really. I mean, punk had kind of, fizzled out probably 77 or so. And then there was that new wave kind of thing coming through with the Boomtown Rats and XTC and, those kind of like post-punk bands. But I still maintain, and it's not just me that says this, of course, but, I think New Wave of British Heavy Metal did act as a kind of catalyst for a lot of rock bands to, pick up a guitar, drumsticks, whatever, and say, well, I can play that. And I know we haven't talked about Diamond Head for a few weeks, but I know Diamond Head's Brian Tatler, the guitarist from Diamond Head, did exactly that. He thought, well, I want to be Led Zeppelin, and I'd love to play at Nebworth, which took place in 1979, the final gigs of Led Zeppelin in this country. But it's a long way from my bedroom to Nebworth. So he said, but I do know I'm a better player than these punk guitarists. So that kind of spurred him on to pick up the guitar, or really, better himself with the guitar, form a band, etc., etc. And the rest, of course, is history, as we know. So an interesting year, and of course Thatcher came to power as well, which also inspired a lot of bands to get out there. Unemployment was high in Britain, and we just had the winter of discontent. So it was a quite dramatic year for music, and obviously we don't often talk about socio-economic things going on in the years, but it was a tough time.
A lot of the bands and albums that you've mentioned in your 79, Scorpions, Motorhead, a lot of great riff-based music. And in 1979, okay, I'm a 10-year-old, so this is real. Mm-hmm. Probably the one, and you're watching Top of the Pops, probably the artist that as a 10-year-old blew my mind was Gary Newman.
Right,
and you think about Gary Newman and is it Tubeway Army? Apologies if I've named.
Yeah,
but you
Army.
Think about Gary Newman being on Top of the Pops, how Bowie-ishy, in terms of his look and whatever. But you think about some of the keyboard stuff that he did, very riff-based. I love Cars, and I think, I'm trying to remember, it's been covered a couple of times by a few, heavy metal bands. And,
yeah, it's true.
Fear Factory. Fear Factory did a cover of it, probably in the 90s or early 2000s. And it's riff-based. So I suppose you're quite right. People were picking up guitars, and I think some people were picking up guitars and riffs and playing big riffs. But even when you're in the kind of the electronic, which was coming in, the whole post-punk piece, you had people doing the keyboard stuff.
Yeah.
But Gary Newman and me in 1979 was like, I loved some of his early stuff that I saw on Top of the Pops. Really a good year for music in general.
Yeah, it was. And it was still that kind of era of, out with the old and in with the new, in a sense.
Yeah.
As I say, Led Zeppelin were, spending longer time between albums.
Yeah.
Pink Floyd, as you say, were kind of on a downward curve, although the Wall was a huge high, but they didn't ever really recapture that, possibly. And so on, Genesis and Peter Gabriel left, and so on and so forth. All that kind of thing that punk had sort of pushed against was crumbling in a way.
Yeah.
And it was being replaced by, as you say, the new wave, this sort of techno, almost industrial music that Gary Newman put together, a slightly more melodic punk version of punk with, as you say, the likes of XTC, the Boomtown Rats, the Skids, Generation X, maybe you could put them in there possibly, and then, as I say, the birth of the new wave of British heavy metal. So yeah, it was an interesting era. And you know what? It does take us back to one of our first conversations that we had about, those kind of 10-year cycles. We talked about it in the context of 1980, well, 79, 80, of course, in the same vein. And then obviously we talked about 1990 previously. But yeah, it was an interesting year. I look back on it fondly, of course, for reasons that I mentioned earlier, as a young lad with, finding my way in the kind of musical world in Thetford, in Norfolk. Oh, too much information again. Anyway, and whilst you were just a short-trousered lad in Limavady, strutting down the high street.
On that note of me in short trousers, and the fact that you did talk about, we can segue nicely out of Highway to Hell.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, yeah. Judas Priest and all that. So moving on, we had a suggestion for something to talk about, which is always nice when we get that, because we do run out of ideas occasionally.
Well, we do, but the only what we always have in the back pocket is, I've always got in my back pocket, Matt. If we ever dry up, I can always talk about my top 20 King's X albums, if you like.
That's true.
So let's not go there.
Let's hope we never run out of ideas then. Or I can do a similar thing about every single song Diamond Head have ever recorded. Yes,
exactly.
I know what you mean. So thankfully, our friend Kelvin Bathe has been in touch and said, what about talking about bands with twin lead guitarists? Which is an interesting one, isn't it?
Yes.
Because not all bands have got twin lead guitarists, have they?
They don't.
What would you say your definition of a twin lead guitar band is, Brian? You wouldn't put AC/DC in that bracket, would you, for example?
No, because there are defined rules in the fact that Malcolm is probably the greatest rhythm guitar player that ever lived, and his little brother Angus was the lead guitar player, and they formed a sound between them that was the AC/DC sound, and Angus played all of the solos. So, who would I define as twin lead guitarist bands? Obviously, I'll not go with the obvious one first, but the first one that I...
You can. Okay. The lawyers have spoken.
Oh, the lawyers have spoken.
Been clear.
Okay, I'm okay. So, Thin Lizzy. So, Thin Lizzy are, for me, the pinnacle of a twin lead guitar, and that basically means that the two guitarists that were in the band both have the capability of playing lead guitar. So, but the beauty of it was, and I think this will be when we get into the conversation, whenever we had stereos and when we had stereos and vinyl, it used to be that you would some albums were mixed in a way that Scott Gorham's lead guitars come out of the left speaker and Gary Moore's, Brian Robertson's came out of the right speaker. And then when they did their little harmony pieces together, it would all be nicely mixed together. So you'd have that little orchestra of the harmonies. So after Thin Lizzy, you've got to talk about Iron Maiden. We've talked about Adrian Smith, Dave Murray. What I like about that is I know how Dave Murray plays. Dave Murray played with, sometimes with a wah-wah, and you could hear him. Adrian Smith was much more technically as a guitar player, and so on and so on. Def Leppard, The Priest, in terms of Priest, Whitesnake, and when you have,
of course,
and what was nice about Whitesnake is you had, Mickey Moody would have played the slide guitar. He would play a lot of slide lead guitar, and Bernie would have played traditional lead guitar. So the 70s was probably the melting pot for the kind of the lead guitar piece. But to answer your question, to answer the question why twin lead guitars or even two guitarists in the band, I go back to Philip Lynott. And Phil Lynott, whenever Eric Bell decided to leave Thin Lizzy in the middle of a show, and Phil basically said, we're going to get two guitarists because at least if we have, if somebody leaves in a show, we've got somebody who can finish it. So it was really out of necessity that Thin Lizzy went from a 3-piece to a 4-piece. Because can you imagine if Jimi Hendrix decided to leave the Jimi Hendrix Experience on an evening? Can't imagine that Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell would have been able to hold a show. So
that's true, actually. And that's quite prophetic because, of course, Lizzy did have, as we discussed before, Lizzy did have their ups and downs with guitarists leaving, hurting themselves before US tours and so on. I know Priest do like that kind of, full sound that is provided by the twin guitarists, whoever they are, whether it be Richie Faulkner, KK Downing, Glenn Tipton.
Yeah.
And I've always been a fan of it because it gives you more sort of, I think it's a bigger sound. It gives you more to look at, of course. And, they complement each other quite nicely. And, I'm a fan of twin lead guitar bands. And, I think there's some good ones there. And there's some more recent ones as well. For example, one of my favorite recent bands is Those Damn Crows, who have two lead guitars of sorts. They're not quite the sort of histrionics of, the days gone by, as it were, but they do have twin lead guitars. So it's still a thing. There are probably other bands in the sort of modern genre, as it were.
But think of the geography of it as well, too. Or think of gigs that you go to, Matt. I bet this would be interesting. So whenever I go and see particular bands, if they've got two guitarists, I will make sure that I'm standing on the side of the stage where my favourite guitarist is. So if we go and see Iron Maiden, I'm always on Adrian Smith's side of the stage because I like watching Adrian playing. No disrespect to Yannick or Dave Murray, I would go and watch. I would always want to. Queensryche are one of my favourite bands who I've been to see, and Michael Wilton and Chris DeGarmo. And we'll actually what we'll do in the Spotify playlist, we'll put up lots of different bands with twin lead guitar players in it. But anytime I went to see Queensryche, I was on Chris DeGarmo's side. So I think it's brilliant having two lead guitarists because can you imagine if you're in a band with just one guitarist, all the guitarists that are going to the gig are going to be if he's not the lead guy in the middle,
true,
everybody's going to pile to the side to go, I'm going to stand and watch the guitar player because he's the guy to watch. And then you've got the poor bass player on the left-hand side. Let's be honest. I bet you it would have been a lot easier getting to the front of John Paul Jones in a Zeppelin gig than it would be for Jimmy Page.
You're right. I should remember that in future because, you go and see Mr. Big or Extreme, someone like that. And people flock to the...
I'm at Nuno's side.
It's stage left on both accounts, I think, isn't it? I think I might do that in future because you get more space, don't you? You can kind of, have a little mosh on your own, and
or heaven forbid, if there's a keyboard player. If there's a keyboard player, you can go and stand at the front, and you could probably stand right in front of Don Airy all night and watch the keyboards.
That's true. The other thing I've often thought about is, and you and I have played in bands, is when you're starting out, less is more, in a sense, because you've got so little space, so little money that you get paid, and also so little space that you get allocated. The thought of having, imagine Whitesnake turning up in like the Dog and Duck, 2 guitarists, keyboard, drums, singer, bass player. Sorry lads, there's no room. There's no room for you. But I'm David Coverdale. Well, sorry mate, I don't care who you are. There's no room. We got the bit over by the dartboard allocated. That's it. That's all we got.
Yeah,
and that would be it. So now I'm a big fan. I like a twin guitar. That said, I like 4 pieces, and I like bands with keyboards in. So I'm easy really in that respect. But it goes back to what we were saying earlier. And you hit the nail on the head, and that's a brilliant memory because I remember when I was again 14, 15. Judas Priest Unleashed in the East is recorded exactly as you described. KK Downing on one channel, Glenn Tipton on one channel, and we had these giant sort of 3-foot speakers that you could lay in front of, and you get a nice kind of effect coming from both speakers, separating the guitars into each speaker, which is great. I think that's been lost a little bit because we tend to just listen to stuff on on our phones and whatnot now, don't we? But
exactly. And I think what's really interesting about having is when you look at twin lead guitar players in bands, thinking about Calvin's question, there's ways in which some of the bands that we've talked about, like Lizzie and Maiden and Judas Priest, where you've got the players playing the riffs and harmonizing with each other, and then you've got that building up the chunky riffy, the fatter sound with 2 players playing in synchronicity, and then you look at through the 80s where you've got the bands like Accept, who were they had very riff based 2 guitarists, strong. I would probably say the start of power metal, as you would call it, that sort of power metal, and then you can sort of. So you've got that bass, and then where it gets interesting is the whole harmonized guitar piece, where you've got bands that are playing harmony pieces together, or you've got guitarists who are... Eagles is a great example, where Don Felder and Joe Walsh... Hotel California is the greatest twin guitar example of playing.
I would say that.
Where you've
Absolutely,
got
I would agree.
Exactly. You've got the arpeggios at the end where the guys are playing the really worked out structured stuff, and then both players play their own separate solos. Now I know what Joe Walsh sounds like, and I know what Don Felder sounds like, and it's lovely that players are able to express themselves within a constructed song that sounds lovely, well put together, but then they can express themselves. I know we're talking about twin guitar players, but for me, the greatest twin sound or harmonized sound of a guitar ever is Brian May. Brian May and Queen harmonized guitars and all of the layering and everything that went into Night of the Opera, which was recorded in Rockfield, which I'll never let you forget from last episode.
You're welcome.
But you think about that and you kind of go, Queen were a great 4-piece, Brian May orchestrated, and he was probably one of the greatest composers of rock harmonies, etc. And he played on his own. And I often wonder, did Brian ever sit sometimes, in 1976 going, oh, jeepers, Freddie, I've got to do it all tonight. Can we not get somebody else in to do the Jeff Nichols of Black Sabbath and stand behind the curtain and just cover me for bits? Sorry, I slightly going off track, but
no, it's good. It's a good point. It's a good point.
Is
that your Brian May impersonation, by the way?
No, because Brian May's not from Northern Ireland.
No. One day you could do a Rory Gallagher impersonation, and you'll be fine. Won't you?
Yeah. Well, you gave me the end on Liam Neeson. Liam Neeson and Adrian Dunbar.
That's true.
Exactly.
That's true. Yeah, I think it's good choices. You should be flattered.
Exactly.
Anyway, I think the bottom line is, what, as we said before, a good band is a good band, a good song is a good song.
Yeah.
Whether it's got 3 guitarists, 1, even none, whatever. But it's an interesting talking point. Finally, while we're on the subject, so if you go and see Def Leppard, which side do you kind of support? Which guitarist do you kind of gravitate towards?
It's very, very easy for me. I'm always stage left. I'm stage left, looking at the stage.
Yes.
Looking at the stage, I am always looking at the Northern Irishman playing a Les Paul, Sir Vivian of Campbell.
Sir Vivian.
Sir Vivian. Obviously, when you're stage left as well too, you often get Rick Savage as well too. So you get the bass player thrown in. Obviously, Phil Collin is on the right hand side. He's got the whole of the stage to himself with his well sculptured bod. It could be minus 57 degrees, and Phil still has got his shirt off.
That's true.
But Def Leppard have moved away from being the twin acts.
Yes,
that they were, because I always thought that Steve Clark and Phil Collin were a great mix. I love Steve Clark's guitar playing, and I think really Vivian gets underused in Def Leppard. But as he says himself, the amount of singing that he does and the amount of work that he does outside of play, he knows his place within Leppard, and he does it very, very well. But Phil Collin, to me, has become the lead guitar player in Def Leppard. But no, to answer your question, stage left on the Northern Ireland side.
Indeed.
Where would you be?
Somewhere in the middle, actually.
Maybe watching Joe.
I'd be keep it. Do you know what? When I go to see Def Leppard, I quite like watching Rick Allen, actually. Of course, amazing playing with one arm. God bless him. So I don't tend to gravitate because I don't really, you know me. I like a singer or I'm quite a fan of a bass player occasionally, or even a keyboard player.
So the one thing I would say, I know we've talked about predominantly in the 80s and the 70s about twin guitar playing. Notable bands I would call out, and I know our friend Matt Graydon's a big fan of this next band, is Night Ranger. Night Ranger are a great band in the 80s. So Jeff Watson and Brad Gillis, who were in that. But even when you move into the 2000s, when I was researching this topic, Matt, research that it's hard to believe that.
Preparation.
Preparation.
You're still doing that, are you?
I still am doing it. I forget it. I forget it by the time we come to the show.
I must do some.
You must do some. But when you actually look into the 2000s, there's some great bands which are still doing a lot of twin lead guitars. Just a couple to call out. Avenged Sevenfold, a great band. I love the names of the two. You talk about great names for lead guitarists. How about this, Matt? Zach Vengeance and Sinister Gates are the two lead guitar players in Avenged Sevenfold. How
they're not their
cool
real
is
names. They're not their real names.
No, that's going to be their real names.
No, his real name is Sinister Jones. He changed it. See,
that's why I thought Brian Mealy is never going to be. I'm never going to be the lead guitar player in Avenged Sevenfold because Zach Vengeance has got a better name than me.
That's a cool name. That is a cool name.
Sometimes twin lead guitar playing can get a little bit out of control. And I will put this band on the playlist. How long it stays on the playlist, I'm not sure, but I will put some Dragon Force.
Oh, yeah.
I will put some Dragon Force on the playlist, and the track that I will play is Through the Fire and Flames. And I think it's one of those tracks that's you know the way they have the computer games, Matt, where you've got Guitar Player where you've got like a little plastic guitar and you press buttons and whatever. I think Dragon Force's Through the Fire and the Flames is kind of, when you get through all of the stages, it's the one that you have to finish in order to become Guitar Hero. So it's up there. And if all I would suggest, if you ever want to laugh some night on YouTube, some people record themselves doing Guitar Hero, and so you're playing some of this extreme power metal where it's all going blah, 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 and you've got kids basically giving themselves repetitive strain injury at the age of about 13. So all they're doing is bashing away in this plastic guitar, and sometimes it doesn't work. And you can see people on YouTube playing this sort of stuff, and then they chuck the plastic guitar at the telly and smash the telly because they've messed up Guitar Hero. So I'm a big fan of twin guitars. However, some bands like Dragon Force and Periphery and some of these extreme power metal bands take it to places where you're kind of going, how can anybody even ever think about playing that as one guitarist? Then you've got two of them copying each other. So
amazing.
Yeah.
That's a nice way to finish that discussion, actually. Yes, Dragon Force, amazing. Check them out. I'm looking forward to that tune.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
That sounds good. Right. Well, we've reached that time of the podcast where it's Hidden Gem time.
It certainly is.
Hidden Gem time.
Oh, we do need a jingle for that.
Hidden Gem. Well, I just did it.
Okay.
You spoke over it. So should I do it again?
You do it again.
Hidden Gem time. I'll have to work on that.
Maybe we should do it. Maybe it needs like dual vocals. Maybe we need harmony vocals for it. Or
I think we're getting a bit carried away now. It's Hidden Gem time.
Okay.
So, I need to give you a year. I forgot about that. Oh, I always forget about that. So I am going to, in time-honoured fashion, I always say that. I mean, it's not that long ago we started this idea. So I'm going to give you a year. I'm going to bring us a little bit up to date, Brian, because when we talked about the 21st century recently, there's some quite good stuff, of course.
Yes, there was.
So I thought I would give you 2010 as your year in rock.
Oh, what a good year in rock, Matthew, for lots of reasons. But we'll talk about that at the next episode.
Well, indeed, that's the idea.
Okay.
Of course. So, Brian, Hidden Gem time. Next week is St. Patrick's Day, and much like we did when we celebrated St. David's Day a couple of weeks ago, we are going to choose our hidden gems with an Irish slant to them.
Okay.
Are you okay with that?
I'm very okay with that.
Prepared?
I've got two prepared. I've got two prepared.
Oh my goodness.
It's gonna get to a point, Matt, where I'm gonna have to put about 15 nominations in to see if I can get anywhere trumping you.
Well, one day, you can live in hope. No, I don't do it on purpose. I just come up with things. But I'm interested to hear your two. So go for it. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm actually going to go with two, but they're actually connected by a very well-renowned guitarist called Pat McManus. So Pat McManus was in Mama's Boys. Mama's Boys started in the early 80s. I think you will have known Mama's Boys because there was a Nwabum connection with Chris Tangarides, who produced their Power and Passion album. But I got into Mama's Boys going and watching them around the clubs in Northern Ireland. I'm a big fan of Mama's Boys. One of the best ever Friday rock show sessions that Tommy put on was Mama's Boys session at Nebworth in 1985 when Purple headlined. Go onto YouTube, people. It's not on Spotify, or I'd share it with you. This isn't my hidden gem, but go and check out Mama's Boys. They're set at Nebworth. It was brilliant. The first of my hidden gems is going to be an album that we released in 1987. John McManus was the bass player. He was struggling with his voice in the 80s. Mama's Boys sang really high. And John just basically blew his voice out. And they brought in a great singer from an English band called Air Race. And the singer was Keith Morrell. Check out Mama's Boys' album with Keith Morrell, which is called Growing Up the Hard Way. It's a lot more commercial. Fantastic album. Very melodic. They were going quite melodic rock. And Keith Morrell's vocal was just the icing on the cake. Sadly, when Mama's Boys were in the throes of promoting that album, Matt, the drummer, the brother, there's obviously three brothers in Mama's Boys. Tommy was the youngest. He had been struggling with leukemia for years. And sadly, Tommy passed away and Mama's Boys effectively disbanded. But what was nice, and I will play a track from this, is the brothers stayed together and they produced a folk album, a folk rock album called Celtus, and they dedicated the album to Tommy from Mama's Boys. Oh, okay. I'll put a track on it. I'll put the title track from the album called Moonchild, and the band was called Celtus. But the nice connection between Mama's Boys, the rock band, and then as they moved into Celtus, lots of traditional Irish music on it. So those are my two considerations for St. Patrick's Day from the family tree of Mama's Boys. Matt.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good choice. I had a feeling you were going to choose Mama's Boys.
Did you? Did you?
I did, indeed. A very underrated Irish band. And as you say, interesting history.
Yeah.
Sad passing of Tommy at a very sadly young age, of course. But yeah, good band. Well worth checking out. Yeah. The back catalogue.
What have you got then?
Well, so there is a link, albeit tenuous, to St. Patrick's Day in my hidden gem this week. Most of my hidden gems are not even that well hidden. They're quite there, hiding in plain sight. And this week is no exception. It's a documentary, another documentary, much like the one I talked about last time. And it features three guitarists. We talked about guitarists earlier. I think you like the build-up.
I do. I love the build-up. Yeah, it's the build-up. You and I would be brilliant at charades, wouldn't we? You only have to say a couple of things and then I go...
Film.
Yeah, film.
Three guitarists.
You didn't even have to mention Jimmy Page, Jack White, or The Edge.
Exactly. So the Edge is the Irish connection. Albeit he was born in England, I think, Edge, Dave Evans.
He was.
Anyway, he's Irish.
I'll get my lawyers onto that just to see whether I can void.
Well, anyway, it's a really good film. Check it out. It might get loud, which is basically Jimmy Page, The Edge, and Jack White from the White Stripes just sitting around and chatting, playing a bit of guitar. I think the best bit in the entire film is because Jimmy Page is, even to The Edge, and Jack White is a legend. He's a god. I mean, he was the Yardbirds. He was with Led Zeppelin, and we talked about Jimmy Page a lot. There's a great bit in it where Jimmy Page shows them how to play the riff of Whole Lot of Love, and it's just lovely. It's just lovely because it's The Edge and Jack White just become fans, and they are fans right there. And they grew up with Led Zeppelin, and of course they're in the presence of one of their heroes, which must be great. but it's just that bit. That's probably the best bit in the whole film when Jimmy Page starts playing Whole Lot of Love, the riff from Whole Lot of Love. And it's great stuff. So my hidden gem this week is another documentary from 2008. It's called It Might Get Loud. Check it out, boys and girls.
What a brilliant hidden gem, Matt. Well done, you. Thank you.
No, thank you. Yeah, enjoy it, everyone. It's out there somewhere. Please feel free to check it out. It Might Get Loud. So that was a wrap, I think.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. It was,
as they say.
Yeah.
That was the film kind of reference. I was going back to the document. So it brings us to the end of another podcast, number 10.
We're into double figures. We'll nearly surpass the amount of episodes that we have people that listen to us.
Almost. We almost got they can almost have an episode each, can't they? No, we don't. We do have one or two more. We always joke about our listeners, and again, we always say this. Thank you very much for listening. We do appreciate it. If you have any ideas or comments or thoughts, find us on Facebook or on Twitter, FOR_salute, and we will see everyone next time, won't we, Brian?
We will indeed. Thanks, Matt. I had a lot of good fun, and we'll see you all again soon. Cheers now.
Bye. See you, everyone. Bye.
Rock on! For Those About to Pod, We Salute You is a Mealy Rogers media production. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe. We'll see you next time.